Good morning. Good morning, colleagues. Good morning, members of CARICHAM, members of the regional business sector. We're very pleased today to have you join with us for our CARICHAM Regional Growth Series. This is the 9th episode of the Regional Growth Series. And this morning we will be looking at mitigating the effects of the global supply chain crisis. We'll be considering a case study of Guyana. We'll be looking at the Guyana experience. We will also be looking at a practical experience, the practical experience of and from one of our CARICHAM countries, that of the matter in St. Lucia. We'll be hearing from regional experts. The persons who will take part in this will be our very own Mr. Andrew Satney. He will be speaking on trade matters. Andrew Satney is a regional expert and an advisor to CARICHAM on trade facilitation. We will also hear from Mrs. Eldris, Pierre-Mauricette, the island manager of tropical shipping. We will hear a case study from Guyana on how it has managed a crisis. That will be from Richard Rambarran, Mr. Richard Rambarran, who is the executive director of the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry. But before we do all of that, we will ask our chairperson, the chairperson of CARICHAM. As you know, CARICHAM is a network of Caribbean chambers. And we have a governing committee, and that governing committee comprises of the chair, the vice chair, and past chairs. The chair at this time is Mr. Brian Louisi. He is the executive director of the St. Lucia Chamber of Commerce, of Industry and Commerce. So at this time, I'd like to ask and welcome Brian Louisi to give our opening welcome remarks.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let me say thank you very much to Martin and the CARICHAM team for organizing this most important webinar and one of our essential events, which is our growth series. The growth series of CARICHAM is really meant to elucidate and share information, increase our knowledge, our awareness of critical issues that we all confront from time to time as you go about our work. We started it a year ago, and we have decided that it is really worthwhile and useful, the kind of information, the kind of best practice that is being shared. And so we need to continue it. So I'm very pleased that as we confront as countries, as chambers, this bothersome issue of a supply chain problems and escalating prices of goods that is really threatening the welfare of our consumers and our businesses, we are be able to bring this webinar to you. I'm very pleased that we've been able to bring together a few experts, a few people who have some good experience and backgrounds and knowledge that they could share with you some critical information that you may be able to utilize. In fact, I know that you'll be able to utilize as you go forward. So without further ado, let me once again welcome all of you to this growth series, welcome you to this webinar, and thank again and welcome our presenters who are joining us today. Ladies and gentlemen, do have a very beneficial and useful webinar this morning. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. That was Brian Louisi, our chair, the chair of CARICHAM. At this time, we have what should be a very interesting lineup. And we will ask the panel to address this moot. So the context of this morning's discussion will be As a result of the measures put in place by our governments to combat the spread of the coronavirus, ports have been experiencing backlogs, causing a major supply chain disruption. This has resulted in escalating shipping costs for exporters with ripple effects to customers. In some countries, the private sector has taken action to mitigate the crisis and has also urged governments to do the same. The Caribbean has not been spared by the global supply crisis, the global shipping crisis. Moreover, the consequences on small economies highly dependent on imports are even more at risk. CARICHAM, through its trade facilitation, or the facilitation component of the trade working group, has been giving attention to the shipping issues surrounding the supply chains in the Caribbean. Since transportation was identified as one of the major issues for trade in the region, we did this to ensure that we would seek, discuss, and propose tangible solutions for the enhancement of decision-making. CARICHAM invites all to this exchange of best practices. And so, to open the discussion on this matter of mitigating the effects of the global supply chain crisis, we will ask Andrew Satney to make his presentation. Andrew Satney, as I mentioned before, is CARICHAM's Trade Facilitation Advisor. Andrew was a former civil servant, but he worked in many countries, including Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Kitts and Nevis, and Andrew is a former executive director of the St. Kitts and Nevis Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Andrew, who to most in the Caribbean needs no introduction, will advise us, will speak to us on this matter of trade facilitation. Andrew has 15 minutes, and we welcome Andrew to open the batting, Andrew. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Martin. Good morning, everyone. And I thank the organizers of this event, CARICHAM, the executive of CARICHAM, for this timely event. What I must say is that, of course, yes, I've been involved in the trade arena for quite a few years at the negotiations level, at the preparations level, and implementation level. So I'm kind of familiar with trade policy matters and issues. Like Martin said, apart from working in the Caribbean, I've worked in Europe and Asia in that regard. The issue of supply chain, the disruption that has taken place since COVID-19 and the challenges faced by everyone is a matter that we must pay close attention to. Simply because at the end of the day, it's impacting on our lives. And as we know, one of the major causes for that is COVID-19, which kind of really started in March last year. I hear people talking about post-COVID. Every time people speak, they're talking about post-COVID. What they should remember is that when COVID started, they were talking about, well, how soon it will end, how quickly we can change this and that and the other. What I must say is that there is no post-COVID. Let's operate like there'll always be COVID as well, because what COVID has done is help us to put up systems that has helped us to mitigate the challenges posed by COVID. For example, when governments decided that to protect the health of everyone, that people should work remotely, schools should be remote and all that, the business community and the public sector made adjustments very quickly with how the workers operate to ensure the following: one, that the ports will not remain closed, will not be closed, customs will continue to operate, goods will be distributed online, shipping companies will have access to our ports, airports and seaports as well, and everything else. So we did things because we responded very quickly. Otherwise, we'd be in trouble, because the way things were going, if we continued to wait, we do not want, for example, to stop production to some extent. And one of the sectors in most of our countries that suffered the most and had to wait a long time before they started the operations was the tourism sector. As we know, ports were closed, restaurants, hotels had challenges and all that, and so on and so forth. But I believe when we speak about the whole issue of supply chain management, let us remember and make a statement right now, and I believe in it. It says, global events will take care of local events, which basically means things will happen around the world that us in the Caribbean has no control over, but it will impact on our lives. And it includes a few, for example, of course, COVID-19, number one, but then you also have global conflicts that are taking place. You also have climate change. Climate change we must pay very close attention to it because it can impact on how our ports operate and so on and so forth. We have to look at, for example, the advances being made with regards to trends in shopping. In fact, one of the factors that contributed to the challenges of the supply chain issue was the fact that whilst people were locked down, they started doing a lot of online shopping. And the demand for goods and services increased. In fact, the demand, according to information put out by UNTAG, which is United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, suggests that trade has increased more than 28% since COVID. And they say 2021 had the highest trade levels ever because, of course, people continued to shop online. People needed their goods for whatever. They couldn't go to the stores, so everything is online and so on, and to deliver to them. Then, of course, linked to that was that the shipping companies did not have enough capacity to move goods from one port to the next and so on. And we saw that especially out of the larger ports of the world, out of China, which accounts for the highest level of exports in the world. So although shipping had the shipping boxes, they had the ships and so on, but then what compounded the situation, and is still, was the fact that the approach to dealing with COVID, where if crew on any ship had a COVID attack, then of course most of the sailors had to be checked, and it kind of really stopped the process. And as we speak, there are two major ports in China that are basically shut with over 80 ships waiting to come in and go out, and so on and so forth. We've paid attention to what's going on in the news with regards to the United States and other ports around the world where they have the congestion. And we ourselves in our own countries, when the private sector has to move their goods in from the United States or wherever, Europe and so on, the delays has not been easy. Linked to that is the fact that since the conflict in Europe started, we've seen the increase in the price of fuel and petrol and so on, which will add to the cost of importing goods into our countries. And also, what I forgot to mention as well, because of the shortages and the challenges faced by the shipping companies, you have a situation where, at the end of the day, the cost of containers, the cost of shipping did increase from that, because you find some countries will tell you to move a container from that would have cost them $6,000 US to their ports in the Caribbean. The cost has gone up to about $15,000, $16,000. That tells you, of course, if you're going to move a container into your port, into your country, you have to be careful what you put in it. You have to put high value items and so on in it and so on, so you can really justify the cost. So the cost of containers has gone up. The cost of shipping has gone up. It has been compounded by the cost of fuel in the country. And so therefore it means, and because we do not have control over these things, it is left to us in our countries to see what actions we can take to help reduce the cost to consumers, because at the end of the day, whatever cost we pay in the supply chain process, it is passed on to consumers. At the same time, we have to ensure we can do things that will reduce our costs so that our goods can be placed on the shelf at a competitive price. We can continue to operate, meet our overhead costs and make some money. At the same time, ensure that there's business continuity. So the challenges that we face, whereas governments have their part to play, we in the private sector have our part to play as well. Later, after my presentation, you'll hear about what Guyana did to help mitigate the challenges. And in so doing, it suggests that there is need for constant collaboration by all the players in the supply chain. The private sector must work very closely with the various departments of governments, the Customs and Excise Department, the Ministry of Finance, because in most countries in the region, they will tell you over 60% of the revenue they collect comes from goods going through their ports. Now, where you have reduction of imports, it will impact on that revenue they collect. In one of our sister countries, recently they indicated because of the COVID-19 situation and the global shipping situation, they lost over $200 million in revenue they could have collected at the ports. That's a lot of money for some of our small islands. Other countries, I'm sure, have had similar experiences. It tells you, therefore, the need for collaboration and consultation between the private sector and government is very important. And when I say the private sector, in the private sector, you even have the shipping companies, you have the air traffic, the airlines as well. You have persons involved in importing and distributing and so on, customs, brokers, shipping companies, all that. We're part of the process. Government, Ministry of Finance has a crucial role to play. They manage customs and other agencies in government. So it means we cannot just sit in isolation, wring our hands and say, oh God, the price of fuel going up. Oh, well, yeah, global supply. And yes, yeah, there's a war going on somewhere and that will impact on our lives. We need to look at what we can do in our respective countries. Can we work with the Ministry of Finance and work out a strategy? For example, what is the cost of clearing a container through customs and the port? Can the ports authorities work very closely with the private sector and say, hey, yes, the cost of the container has gone up, but maybe we might look at as a temporary measure, reducing the cost of clearing a container through the ports. It's because things happen when we speak to each other. In some countries, for example, the customs costs are because they do not do overtime. Some goods containers come in at 9 in the morning or 8 o'clock in the morning. By 10 o'clock, it is in the yard of the importer. And there are tools through the trade facilitation agreement that we've signed on to, that if we use them, it will reduce our cost of operations. For example, there's a particular facility there that is called authorized operators, which I'm not going to, but it's basically there. It's left to the private sector to approach the Ministry of Trade and the Ministry of Finance and say, hi, there are measures there that we can help reduce our costs. Like I said, can we adjust, I use the word adjust on the amount of overtime that is used, because that will add to your cost every which way. Whereas out there, they have costs, we have no issues and costs we have no control over. Underground in our respective countries, we can do stuff. It is important, therefore, that we do not treat this thing in isolation. This is, and it's going to be there for a long, long time, because of course we thought when COVID is off, and I do think we should operate in that manner. We have taken a lot of actions to continue to operating throughout the pandemic. We have invested in software, hardware, training our staff to work remotely and getting things moved. Governments have done the same. The customs operators, customs officers work from home, shift system, whatever else, just to ensure, because of the issue of social distancing, we were able to move our stuff. It means, therefore, we should continue to strengthen those facilities we've put in place, improving our software and set up and look at what we did to manage as we manage this crisis. And do not ease off. Let us intensify. Like I said earlier, we have global warming, climate change that is impacting on our ports. Maybe wave action. Recently in Europe, they had a storm that arrived there all of a sudden, and it severely impacted on the ability of ships and so on to move in the different ports. That added to the delays in goods getting to the different destinations. So whereas climate change, the pandemic has been going on for 2 years, and people are predicting how soon it will end and so on. Let us not operate with that in mind. Let us continue to fortify whatever systems we put in place, administrative in particular, investment in technology, investment in our people, and making the adjustment that to ensure we continue to operate efficiently and effectively to reduce our costs. It will not be business as it used to be, and it will not be business as usual. Again, like I said earlier, global events take care of local events. We don't run things as Jamaicans see. Things will happen. And so some countries, for example, what they've done and say, okay, some big shipping lines have also suggested to some countries and in the United States and other places that, hey, a lot of the bulk goods, the large container ships come out of Asia, bringing goods to us. Perhaps there might be opportunities in some of the islands in the Caribbean where they could encourage transshipment, where bring it near shore as it relates to the major markets like the United States and North America. So some of us may have ports that have capacity in warehousing and so on. We may want to look at that. And it is not a short-term planning. This thing is not short-term. Whatever plans we make, it has to be long-term. It means, therefore, we continue to improve. It means, therefore, like I said earlier, we speak with each other. Consultations between customs and the private sector is essential to ensure efficiency, reduction of red tape and time wasting. And I know the customs departments in most of the islands are prepared to work with the private sector. We just have to engage them adequately. The Ministry of Finance, for example, very important as a partner in whatever we do. And they will work with us to ensure there's business continuity so that people can remain employed. Goods can reach the shelves so consumers can purchase them. Our construction industry, for example, has been severely hit because right now, if somebody is going to build a house for you or any construction activity, they may not be able to tell you the final cost of the house simply because the price of the inputs, whether it be lumber and so on, cement, whatever they're going to use, because as you know, we import everything for construction except maybe local tarish, local sand and so on and so forth, and quarry material. The costs are increasing, and sometimes they have to factor in another cost. Maybe they'll say, I'll put in 15% contingency. The shipping lines, because of the rapidly changing cost of fuel, maybe it goes up and down and so on. They have added on, some of them have continued to add on what you call a bunker adjustment cost, which is a factor they use to say in case of fuel. Some lines are smart. Some of them have been able to do their own futures trading by the fuel online future, which means basically they hedge their cost so that they are not impacted on the daily or weekly fluctuation of the cost of fuel. Some of them, for example, have changed their operations to become more efficient. Like I said, they are doing what they're doing out there. It is up to us to look at everything. As Kate Martin said, let's think outside of the box. Let's be creative in our thinking. And let's look at ways and means, because the whole issue has to do with ensuring goods reach customers, business continuity, and we are prepared. So at all times, we cannot pack up and say and start relaxing on what we have done so far because of the pandemic and say, okay, things are going to get easier. It's not going to become easier. Let's just strengthen what we've done. Let's improve our capacity. There's enough data going around and research that shows what we can do because of the global supply chain situation. And I thank the Chairman Martin for inviting me and CARICHAM to make this presentation. We at CARICHAM are always there to work with our private and public sectors throughout the 19 countries where we operate. I think 19 countries that we operate, starting from the Bahamas all the way to Suriname. The issue is we just have to engage the public sector as much as possible, engage our customers. If you're in the shipping business, you have to engage your customers that you facilitate and all that to ensure that we are not alone in this and we all work together as a team. Otherwise, if we continue or if we do not pay attention, then we stand to perish. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. That was indeed a mouthful. I'm not sure who's had breakfast yet. Andrew certainly provided a meal, and it is up to the willing eaters, if you have appetite, to seek to digest what was said. It was certainly a lot of food, a lot that was put on the table. And I believe, Andrew, as an opening batsman, you have put yourself in the category of Haynes and Greenwich and these fellas. Now, this is a serious matter, but we need to look at it from the Caribbean context. To the audience, I wish to advise you that we will be placing some questions in the poll, and we want you to respond to these. These are primarily internal to CARICHAM. We want to know what you think of our regional growth series and other things. We want you to rate the speakers. We want to find out, what additional questions you would wish to have us address in the growth series, and how you think CARICHAM can be of real value to you. So from time to time, as the sessions go on, we will place these polls. We'll place these questions in the polls, and we'd ask you to be kind enough to share your comments with us. Thank you so much, Andrew. And because of time, we will now move into the next presenter. But before that, we can have some questions on the presentation from Andrew Satney. So we invite some of your questions. We know that you must have a few concerns about the global supply chains. You may have some questions from the presentation that Andrew has just given. So we want to allocate some time for your questions. Please feel free to type in the facility given for the chat. Okay, so let me ask Andrew. Andrew, since there are no questions yet, let me ask you. Andrew, one of the things that I heard you say is that the pandemic is not yet over. We should not consider that it is business, we have reverted to pre-pandemic times. Andrew, some of the things that you placed on the table would be the ever-changing dynamics of the global business environment. Right now, we see that there is an invasion of one country to another in Eastern Europe, Eastern and Central Europe, and that has had an impact on not just that geopolitical region, but also all the other countries that trade with them. It also will have an impact on countries who may not directly trade with Russia and Ukraine. So Andrew, tell me, what we have seen the impact of prices of fuel going up. How do you see that affecting us here in the Caribbean? The increase in, and why would you think, if you agree, why do you think it would affect us?
I think during my introduction, I did say global events will take care of local events. Just remember that. Last week,
correct.
Last week I was doing a presentation to the senior customs officers in CARICHAM, and I identified 16 issues over the last 5 years that impacts and will continue to impact our lives. And I know you speak about what's going on there in Europe and so on. I will attempt not to go into that, but as you all know, it impacts. So it's all part of the global events that take care of us along that side that will impact on us. So I would just want to list the 16. I have the globalization and trade liberalization. That's been there for a while. Globalization and trade liberalization. We are part of the process. There are 154 countries now that are members of the WTO. And some of us, 1 or 2 of us who may not be in it, whatever the agreement is all about. And that is why at the end of the day, we have the trade facilitation agreement, which implementation started 5 years ago, February 22nd, 2017. And at the end of the day, it was an interesting agreement where they agreed that when you have 2/3 that have ratified the agreement, 2/3 of the membership that have ratified the agreement, it becomes in effect. So in 2017, 2/3 of the 150-something countries of the WTO ratified the agreement. And let me just say, when we say we ratify agreement, is that we do not go and negotiate, sign an agreement, we come home and we ratify it, and we do not adjust our local laws to ensure that the laws we have are in agreement with what we signed on to. Because again, as a global agreement we're into, we have to make our own adjustments to make sure that if something happens, we can say, well, we're following our local legislation and so on, so on, so. Again, why we want to be, and it's important that we understand that as private sector and public sector people, that we can challenge it. For example, if you go and play your goods on the port, somebody referring to a piece of legislation that is not relevant. The second one I said was COVID-19, and I have said a lot about COVID-19, and we all know about COVID-19. We've been impacted every which way, right? We've seen the issue of the internet developing and expanding and growing, and growth in online shopping, which is, and conducting business remotely. That is very important. So for example, if we are going to go global and do business, we have to ensure that our internet service is adequate, it works effectively, efficiently. It means, therefore, if we have challenges in our own different countries as we want to, because we have to do business remotely. This is what it's all about. It's going to continue. We have to speak to our service providers and say, hey, I was in a business call like me and you, like we're doing right now, and the call dropped or whatever. What's going on? Have you invested in the necessary infrastructure, software, staff, and everything that you can be competitive, we can provide this service? Quickly, I just wanted to say we've seen advances in technology, digitization, where everybody had to go to during COVID. We had to continue it. The banks are encouraging you to come to see them, do everything online. We've seen, for example, working remote is a way of life. Schooling remote is a way of life. Competition has increased rapidly because of all these developments and more. We've seen that the transportation systems have become more efficient. The service provider in transportation, they will not tell you they provide transportation, they'll tell you they provide logistics. So that's what FedEx will tell you, DHL, Tropical will tell you that they provide logistics, Amazon and all of them. So therefore our customs officers, I encourage them to understand they are facilitator of logistics first. And if they facilitate logistics, there could be trade and governments can collect revenue from the duties they will collect. I continued and said, of course, convenience and accessibility is very important. So now a lot of us in country, we buy even our meals online. We click online and somebody goes pick it up and bring it to our home from the restaurant just down the road. And if you have the traffic situation, several countries have with regards to moving around, you know that service will increase. Consumer education, they're right there. They might know more about your business than you think you know. So it's very, very important that you pay attention to your customers and consumers. Climate change, I mentioned that earlier. It's a serious matter. And if we have global warming and we have rising sea levels, it will seriously impact on our ports. Because as we know, our ports are by the sea and 80% of goods that are shipped around the world go by sea, including rivers and streams and so on. So we have to pay attention to that. Then we go down the road and we talk about international conflicts. And this is what you're talking about. International conflicts matter. There are several stories going on around it. And I will tell you, I will not give an opinion on it. However, we see it's impacting on us because of the cost of fuel, cost of food and so on, because we all net food importing countries around the Caribbean. And with all our goods, we import them to do whatever. So international conflicts are there. And we go down the road and I talk about demographic changes, which has to do the way our people live, where they live now and what, and their whole lifestyles and so on. Marketing extremely important. There's aggressive marketing taking place at all times throughout the course of the day and night by all persons who have stuff to sell and market. And of course, the importance of customer experience. For example, if we are to remain competitive and people will do business with us, it is important that the private sector and all of us, as well as government, provide the experience that will encourage customers to go and come back to them. Trade facilitation, the TFA, this is the tools for the public sector, and the private sector must be knowledgeable about it so they can challenge the public sector, including Agriculture Department, Bureau of Standards, and all the other border agencies, why they're not applying it, because they've signed it and ratified the agreement. And finally, I have the global supply chain issues, which we've been talking about. So there you go. I have 16, there are more, but this is all what has impacted on us. Will continue to be more intensive. And if we look at it that way, we will kind of make adjustments in our own operation. We will also encourage, like I said, partnerships between government and private sector. We're all in this together.
Andrew, thank you. Baton pad well together. No ball is getting through that that defense, Andrew. Thank you very much. At this time, I will. Great. At this time, we will have some questions to put in the poll.
Hi, Martin. We will address the poll at the end of the session, so you can move on to the next panel.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, so let us now hear from the next panelists. I'm sure that you've had quite a bit of information from Andrew. We want to introduce to you Mrs. Eldris Morissette. She's the island manager of Tropical Shipping in St. Lucia. So Tropical Shipping St. Lucia Limited, which is the Caribbean's leading freight carrier and logistics solution provider. She began her career in logistics and transportation 11 years prior to joining Tropical Shipping, and this was as a sales coordinator. Then moving steadily through the ranks as a sales representative, then sales manager, and her current position moved to her current position over an accumulation of 25 years in the industry. Her in-depth knowledge of markets and her ability to negotiate complex shipping solutions positions her as a valuable resource, an industry expert, and sort of transportation consultant to her peers, customers, and colleagues alike. Mrs. Mauricette also serves on the executive of the St. Lucia Shipping Association and is a CAPM certified person, and she directly manages the organization of several community events and projects. She believes in building relationships that support the business goodwill and quality for all life. Certainly a good, valuable, and in-depth experienced resource person for addressing the matter of global supply chain and the crisis in which we find ourselves. Mrs. Mauricette is our next speaker, and we'll be pleased to have her follow Andrew in the batting lineup. Mrs. Mauricette, the second ball is yours.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you, CARICHAM, for giving us this opportunity to present to you some of the challenges from a shipping line's perspective. I'm going to share my screen with you. Okay. I'm going to start with a brief introduction on Tropical, what we do. Tropical has been serving this region for over 53 years. We have over 1,000 employees and we operate in 32 locations throughout the region. We're based in South Florida, that's where we're headquartered. And we have offices in North America and Canada, New Jersey, West Palm Beach, and throughout the region. Some of the services that we offer are refrigerated cargo, where we move a lot of frozen stuff, temperature controlled items. We also offer marine insurance, rated AM Best, #1, under our sister company, 7 Seas Insurance. We offer transportation on dry goods, not only for full containerized cargo, but also for less than containerized cargo. So if you wanted to consolidate multiple shipments, we have warehousing facilities in Florida and Canada, New Jersey, where you can send your small packages, palletized cargo, and we can consolidate and ship it as either less than container load or as an exclusive box. We also offer inland transportation throughout the US. We will spot the container at your supplier's facility, they load, and we pick up. Everywhere in red on this map shows where Tropical operates an office. So we start in the Bahamas all the way down through to, this map only shows you Guyana, but most recently we did start a service into Suriname. Maritime transportation is the backbone of global trade and the world economy. Over 90% of trade moves via ocean transportation. The pandemic and subsequent events have tested the resilience of global supply chains and the readiness of global economies to mitigate the challenges of these sudden and unforeseen events. This slide just gives you a picture of how trade has grown from 2009 through to Q4 of 2020. Here we can see how the increase in trade. So despite the impact of COVID, we saw trade increase in 2021 over 2022. And that was as a result of a lot of factories being closed and a lot of disruptions in supply chain because of COVID. We saw trade increase in North America on imports by 13%. Persons were coming back to work, persons were working from home, stimulus packages from US government, from Asian governments, and persons were just trying to restock on what they had lost in 2020. So imports grew in North America by 13%, exports 13%. Within the Caribbean region, here we saw an exponential growth of 31% on imports and 31% on exports. Within Asia, we saw the growth of 17% on imports and on exports 11%. One of the major, I'm going to go through the different challenges that we face as a US-based carrier. Whilst we do service the global markets, we do it through a partnership with a carrier called Kestrel. So Kestrel is a non-vessel operating carrier. So from the global markets, we as a carrier would book on those deep sea carriers, the larger carriers, to take the cargo into one of the regional ports. And as a regional carrier, Tropical would then move it down the region. So as a North America-based carrier, some of the major challenges that we're facing, one being trucking. And the biggest problem we see trucking is persons are hesitant into going to the trucking business because of the high liability cost on insurance. Also, the Department of Transportation requires a premium of about $12,000 to $15,000 annually. So this serves as kind of a deterrent as to why you're seeing shortages in the number of drivers available, because it's a risky business too. It's an isolation industry. Truck drivers are on the road away from their family for long periods of time. So this is just compounding some of the challenges that we're seeing with moving goods inland within the US. Another challenge within the US is the congestion at the rail. Rail, although it's not as quick, although it is not as quick as trucking, but it's a more cost-effective alternative. And last year, in the last quarter, the US rail, the Florida East Coast rail, got really congested, and we saw the rail shut down for 10 days. So many of the operators within the region would have experienced delays in their goods arriving on time. So that shutdown was just to help clear out the backlog and ease on the congestion to allow the flow of cargo. Within the region, our economies are heavily dependent on cruise. And from November through to April, most of the Caribbean islands would face berthing conflicts with cruise vessels. And cruise obviously takes precedence over cargo. So this would cause a major delay for us. So for example, in St. Lucia, by the time our vessel comes in to operate, but because of the heavy discharge we're seeing, there's insufficient time to backload empties. So this is causing an issue for ports where there's demand for empty containers to re-export. So some of you may experience carriers saying, hey, we have no equipment available to support your export business. So this is one of the factors that is causing the delays in getting equipment to the markets where they're most needed. Another issue we see within the region is breakdown of equipment. Continually, you'd have crane breakdown, reach stacker breakdown, forklift inoperability. So it's just, apart from COVID, all of these issues are just compounding the problem with the supply chain management. Fuel, the big topic of the day. The fuel crunch has added another layer of difficulty to what was already considered a difficult situation. The shipping industry is a critical circulatory system for the world economy. High fuel prices and fuel shortages, even the temporary ones, make it a lot harder to move goods as drivers, carriers, and suppliers look to raise prices in an effort to keep the cost and minimize bottlenecks at supply chain. As a carrier, fuel is our largest expense. So like Andrew alluded to earlier, most carriers do futures buying. So we kind of have a little safeguard against the daily rate of the increase in fuel. So what you will see coming is the cost of fuel changing every 2 weeks. So you may get notifications from your carrier. I think most of the carriers within the region have already announced a fuel increase on April 10th. So the next increase will be towards the end of April, and it will continue like that. For how long? We don't know. From the global carriers perspective, like we said, we do last leg for a lot of the major carriers out of South America, out of Asia, out of Latin America. From the onset of the pandemic, there was high demand for goods, and it meant more containers were in use, delays at terminals, ramps, warehouses, and ports. According to the Journal of Commerce, this deteriorates chassis, container availability in almost every major city, and as a result, less equipment is available to move goods between locations. As a carrier, we normally go out every year and we would source new equipment. So we would bring like an additional 2,000 brand new equipment into the fleet, and we would decommission the older ones. For the last 2 years, we've not been able to lease containers, buy containers, and even the fabrication of new containers is taking a really long time. So for example, we have an order out now to get an additional 1,500 new units into the system just to help with the shortage of equipment. We're only able to bring in 400 towards the end of May, and we're hoping by end of third quarter, we can bring in another 500. To the left of my chart, this shows you the number of days on average year to date that our equipment stays at customers' facilities within the different region. It was my intention to show you the comparison for 2020, but on average here, we're seeing that some containers are staying in port locations for as long as 87 days. So this compounds the problem. Last year, well, pre-COVID, let's say 2018, 2019, thereabout, we had a turnaround time of 8 to 15 days to get the equipment moving. But now, because of fear of shortages, we're finding persons are holding on to containers because they want to buy more, stock up for a longer period rather than holding more inventory, whereas in the past, persons were holding inventory for a shorter period and basically using the carriers' containers as temporary warehousing. So this too just compounds the problem when somebody who needs to book cargo out of one of the major source markets can't get an equipment. The shift we're seeing now from the global trade, because of the length of time it takes to move cargo now, because the vessels are just running extremely heavy, there's just no space. Whilst most of those larger carriers have implemented a guarantee to sail. So in some cases, we're seeing that they're charging as much as between 1,500 US to 2,000 US just to secure a booking. Even when you find persons willing to pay that additional freight charge, you can't even get a booking on time. So we're seeing more nearshoring. So suppliers are looking at sourcing goods from Mexico, Latin America. The Dominican Republic has become a source market of interest to a lot of the regional importers. Diversion of international carriers to more profitable markets. So more of the, like I said, more of the carriers, they've pulled out of this region. In October last year, we saw 2 major carriers pulled out of St. Kitts, the Virgin Islands, Antigua, and lately Trinidad. So this is putting a strain on the few carriers who now service the region. We've also seen one other carrier just increase their transit time for the intra-regional business. So like I said, this is just putting a strain on the few carriers that we have now who have been committed to this region and continues to serve. 2022 will continue to be a challenging year. Freight prices will remain at near historic highs due to limited capacity, equipment shortages, fuel volatility, and high operating costs. The impact will be felt globally, but more so on small island states. In 2021, the National Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, reviewed on maritime transportation urges consumers to monitor and analyze trends to find new ways of cutting costs, enhance efficiency for smooth supply chain. And this is the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Wow. Mrs. Pierre-Mauricette, Eldris, thank you so much. Excellent presentation. Quite a large amount of industry information. I think that we have been able to see from a perspective of the shippers, how the supply chain has been affected. The issues that affect the supply chain and the outlook for the rebound of the supply chain. I noted, and just after this, I'll ask the audience to weigh in with their questions as well. I know that there's a question for Andrew, but before we go there, I just want to address something. You are looking at some of the challenges that are being experienced with the shipping lines. I noted for one of your slides, it had to do with the global, the availability of global containers and chassis. What was the normal turnaround time for containers? Did you? I know you mentioned. I'm not sure what it was, Caribbean specific or globally, but there was a turnaround time that has increased tremendously.
Yes, that was the number of days that containers stay at the destination ports. So for us within the region, our major source market is the US, and we have some of the Caribbean islands who export heavily. As small islands, so take for instance, Trinidad is a big source market for the region. Trinidad is a 40-foot import market, but most of the cargo coming into the smaller islands would move in smaller containers, in 20-foot containers. So there's a
break bulk.
Yes, yes. So there's
and recontainerized for distribution.
Exactly. So you find that there's a mismatch right there. So there's insufficient containers available to move the cargo within the region. But because persons are holding on to the containers too, it doesn't allow you to move it. And when we go back to another complication within the region is the equipment at the ports. So that's a big challenge, because if we have functional equipment, cranes, reach stackers, it would allow you greater productivity during your vessel operation.
Right.
To allow you to move your equipment within the region to the places where it's needed most.
Right. There's also one of the challenges I noted as you were speaking, and I mean, you've just laid so much on the table. It's amazing. One of the challenges you presented was the case where in some countries, perhaps most, you have cargo competing with cruise.
Yes,
And
yes.
that obviously presents a huge challenge, because then ports are facing a problem of which do they give precedence to. And given the huge amount of revenue that is earned from cruise passage, there is that challenge to move the cargo or to get cargo. So I want to put in a plug for the Antigua and Barbuda, well, the Antigua's new port. We probably have the biggest port in this part of certainly the OECS. And we have separated our cargo from our cruise. We have 5 piers. So I'm shamelessly putting in a plug for what we're doing here. I'm sorry to my other colleagues, but it requires a huge investment. We've put in about almost 100, a little over 100 million to expand and renovate our cargo port. And we have also done some work on our cruise port. But this is not entirely about, I'm being needled by one of my colleagues here. But this is not entirely about Antigua, it's about our solutions. And thank you so much. At this point, I'll invite other questions from the audience. Do you have a question on what we have just had? I said first the second ball, but you got the second over. And, you know, I think that West Indies can use you as one of their batsmen. You certainly were able to handle the challenge and make good use of those balls, dispatching them with aplomb. Thank you very, very much. So at this point,
Martin, you said you had a question for me?
Yes, sir. Well, I just wanted to see if we had any questions for this particular presentation before we revert it to you, Andrew. 1 second. Are there any questions that we have, any additional questions for the presentation from Mrs. Mauricette?
No, at the time we have questions for Andrew. What I may suggest, yes.
Okay, so we'll get a quick, yeah. We'll get Andrew's question, and someone is asking if we'll get copies of the presentations. I believe that once you've registered, we'll be able to send that to you. The question for Andrew is, we speak about utilizing technology efficiently and effectively to reach the global market. However, we find that many companies in the region do not invest in the technology we speak of. How can CARICHAM reach and reiterate to those companies the importance of technology post-COVID? And note that's in brackets, because Andrew and many experts do not think we'll ever be rid of COVID. But the question is, how can CARICHAM reach and reiterate to those companies the importance of technology post-COVID to compete on a global level? Can you answer that in 1 minute, Andrew?
Thank you, Martin. I just wanted to say quickly, because of what has happened with the pandemic and so on and so forth, if you expect to remain in business, you must invest in technology. For example, if you're going to clear goods in customs, what you're going to do when they ask you in some countries where you have your single electronic window, where all your documents has to go through the system to be cleared online. What about you? It's not investing. Some of our businesses, depending on the size, may not be able to invest in the level of technology, and the level of investment varies from size of operation and so on. But investing in technology, for example, if you have to do business with the bank, you have to invest in technology, food digitization and so on, digitalization. If you have to place your orders, it's technology. So we in CARICHAM we are looking at helping our partners in the process. For example, we did one of our growth series seminars we did recently, late last year, had to do with cybersecurity, simply because we want our members to know, hey, cybersecurity is very important to the business that we are in. So it is in their interest to invest in the required firewalls and other protective facilities in the technology to ensure that they do not get hacked. And when I say our business members, the business members of CARICHAM are quite broad. We have people in banking, we have people in other areas of finance, technology, and so on. So we kind of very early brought that to their attention, especially when we heard on the news last year about the hacking that took place in the United States of a meatpacking plant that affected the whole world. Some of us get hacked in the region, but we tend not to say anything. We try and resolve it as quickly as possible. So I have no fear that our business partners, our members in CARICHAM will invest in the necessary technology because they don't have choice. Technology is listed in the 16 events that I identified. The growth in technology, the way you do business, e-commerce and everything, e-payments, everything is e. So you have to invest. And just before I close, I end this submission, let me just commend Ms. Mauricette for her presentation in which she was brutally frank and honest about what's going on. And I think that is very important for everyone to pay attention to. This is what is happening. And one of the things I just wanted in my presentation, I did mention global warming. With the frequency of intense storms, we might have containers lying in some ports longer than planned because the shipping lines cannot get in to take them out and so on. So that will further compound the situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you very much. And I think West Indies cricket could really use our presenters. We have gotten an extremely talented and prolific set of persons. In Antigua, we produced one of the best batsmen in the world. You know what his position was? He was the #3 batsman, none other than Sir Vivian Richards. Isaac Vivian Alexander Richards. He celebrated his 70th birthday last Monday. We have a #3 batsman on the cards. And I will tell you now, you can expect nothing less than a stellar performance from Richard Rambarran. Richard is one of our colleagues. He's the executive director of the Guyana Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Richard and the private sector in Guyana, they looked at the supply chain issues and they faced this frontally. They decided that they had solutions and they went to the government with solutions. The case study today surrounds the findings from the the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I will turn you over to none other than Richard Rambarran. Richard, please inform us.
Thank you very much, Martin, and good morning, colleagues. Thank you for all the presentations that have gone before me. They, of course, make my work here a little bit easier because both Andrew as well as Eldris have both competently described the prevailing context, the global circumstances with which we are faced. I want to say, of course, Guyana, similar to many other economies in the Caribbean, is a small open economy. And by that very virtue, we are not exempted from any of the occurrences globally. And more particularly because we are a small economy integrated into a global framework, we usually have to take whatever it is that occurs in a business sense, in an economic sense, and even in some cases in a geopolitical sense. I won't endeavor to go into my opinions and my analysis on the economic elements of it because that's not my function here today. What I'll attempt to do is to adumbrate what particularly the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce and Industry, through the actions of myself as well as the president of the chamber, who has been very open and receptive to the guidance from me, we have done, more particularly since 2021 March. The blockage of the Suez Canal, which occurred during March 2021, is something which I see as being essentially the impetus for this entire supply chain issue which we have. And of course, it's compounded by other dimensions of activities and issues with commerce and shortage of containers and other factors which are unable to be influenced. But particularly, I want to say since then, we have paid an accentuated degree of importance to the developments in and around the international supply chain. And we had been monitoring the situation and continue to monitor the situation. But we were monitoring the situation extraordinarily closely. And it is for that reason, in about the beginning of July or the end of June, thereabouts, in 2021, we had taken it upon ourselves to attack this issue frontally in our Advocacy, Business and Economic Affairs Committee. I would have spoken as the technical advisor to the Council of the Chamber, and of course, virtue of sitting ex officio on all of the committees, I would have spoken to the committee and advised that there are ways that we can move or maneuver around this. Now, what I'll endeavor to do here is to share a series of documents or a series of developments which will give you the continuum of events and, of course, shed light as to where we are now in Guyana. So we would have had that meeting in June and July where I would have highlighted, and you will see from what I present to you here that what we had actually proposed was a bit more of a radical approach to assisting with mitigating this crisis. But some middle ground or some compromise was reached, and we have been able to obtain some amount of relief in Guyana. Naturally, you know, when you do negotiation, you would tend to take it firstly to a point where you believe it's unachievable, and then work your way down to what it is that you want. So we usually tend to apply that type of tactic, if you will, in our advocacy and lobbying here. I hope that there are no officials from government of Guyana on here or any other stakeholder agency, but usually that is what we tend to do because it oftentimes helps us to reach the opposition, which is, even if it is not 100% desirable, it is at bare minimum second best. So what I'll do, let me just share this here. We would have started off in as I would have mentioned, in July, and working through observing the crisis, etc. We would have taken it upon ourselves to say, this doesn't seem to reach, it's not seeming to reach an end. There seems to be no sight, no end in sight. And as such, on August 5th, we took it upon ourselves to pen this letter to our finance minister, Dr. Ashley Singh, which essentially highlights that the novel coronavirus and of course other events have greatly impacted shipping globally. Consequently, we've seen shipping prices triple and in some cases quadruple. And this has had a sharp impact on the cost at which products can be provided in the domestic market. We also highlighted that when goods arrived in Guyana, this increased costs. Duties and other charges are then levied on the CIF value. And of course, with the freight component of this value reaching record heights, concomitant duties and charges have been made, and that naturally increases the cost at which it's being provided. So the idea with it was that we wanted to request on behalf of the membership of the chamber that consideration be given for duties to actually be applied to the free on board value as opposed to the CIF value. And we believed in that it would have eased the burden on the private sector, who in the short term would have obviously had the unfortunate scenario of passing this cost on to consumer. And we believe that we tied it in with what was happening with the novel coronavirus and of course the natural shocks that would have occurred in the economy as a result of the pandemic. And we highlighted that compounded by recent flooding in Guyana that afflicted the agriculture sector in a major way would have eroded consumer welfare, and in many instances had already eroded consumer welfare. So we requested that this be done. However, we had a meeting with the Honorable Minister, who then indicated that what he would want us to do is to actually switch what he is recommending, and wanted, of course, our tacit approval. Naturally, we cannot tell the minister what to do, but as the persons raising the issue, we wanted us to be in acceptance or support what it is. So they would have then issued on August 12th and a release. This is from the Guyana Revenue Authority website. Our customs division is a unit there. So relief for freight charges for importers on August 12th, 2021. So His Excellency the President gave a directive of the following. And what you'll see here is what essentially is in the public domain in Guyana. That a relief will be provided where freight charges will be reverted to pre-pandemic levels in the calculation of duties and taxes on goods imported and sold locally. So the GRA advised that the relief to freight charges will be applied to import of goods as stated below, subject to these conditions. And in the conditionalities, they would have had a period of time, that's one, 6 months, and then a date on the invoice being after August 1st, 2021, that the measure is for freight purpose used only in the calculation of duties. The invoices must be at an FOB level and the FOB position must be clearly stated on the invoice and such like, and the relief is granted for the reduction of freight to the pre-pandemic level of March 31st, 2020, and will only apply if the actual freight charges paid is higher than the pre-pandemic amount. So what they actually did, the government they had a look at the country of origin, and this actually is an error here. This 2021, it's supposed to be 2020. That was made public, but they didn't change it on the revenue's website, the Revenue Authority's website. So what they did, they had a look at what it costed importers to bring containers from these various countries of origin. And then they gave some annexes where countries or regions not specifically mentioned above will be reviewed on a country basis when a declaration is submitted or when audits are conducted. And of course, giving the Commissioner General of the Revenue Authority any power within a degree of reasonableness to act, and that will be communicated to the general public. So this naturally came at a time when, and you'll see that here, this naturally came at a time when people are worried about the prices, and there is oftentimes, as you all in private sector organizations would know, a worry as to whether this would be translated to consumers. And this is where I think chambers of commerce in particular have an important role to play in this entire construct. I'll reach to some lessons at the end of my brief here, where I'll go through what I think are some of the roles that we have to play as chambers of commerce and as those in the organized private sector. So this was done effectively, and what we had was the Chamber of Commerce issuing a statement in support of, and that of course will bring me to another dimension of what we need to talk about in terms of chambers of commerce. And this was a press release that we did supporting the government's change in duties and so on. Of course, all of this was provided for. The president would have indicated it on Monday, 9th of August. We issued this statement on the 10th of August, on the night of the 9th of August, and it was effected in the Revenue Authority by August 12th. Of course, you know, these things occur with a lag. Issuing statements of this nature tend to push things along in the administrative realm a bit faster. Now, fast forward to our budget for 2022. Recall that when we did this here, when we examined this, it said until January 31st, 2022. Now, our budget of recent has been read in February of 2022. So part of our submissions to the Ministry of Finance then encapsulated us extending this facility throughout 2022. So what happened was that in the annual budget that was read that this particular regime would be extended throughout 2022 as a matter of government policy through the appropriation bill in the national budget. So it has been extended throughout, and this is what we see occurring here now in February 3rd, 2022. It's essentially an extension of the relief. And effectively, it is the same thing as the last time. And this is what is the current regime and the current occurrence that is happening in Guyana. Now, what I wanted to particularly say, I wanted to highlight a few things. So that firstly, all of this was only possible because of the consistent and continuous dialogue that the Chamber of Commerce here in Guyana has with the Finance Ministry. And it is extraordinarily important that when we highlight our positions, that they are well researched, carefully thought out, and of course they can be substantiated either through logic, research, policy work, numbers, whatever it is, but it must be done from an empirical basis. And that is perhaps the first thing that puts the organization in a position that when it advances a particular policy suggestion on a matter, that it is taken on board. And all of this is as a result of the work that the Chamber has done over time to put itself in the position. Secondly, there must be, in instances where I think the Chamber of Commerce or any business grouping has called for a particular public action, in my view, it must also, by the same token with which you call it for, and the same token by which you raise the flag, I think in that very same way, we must lend the applause when you have been heard. I think that lends itself to a good measure of consistent support, mutually beneficial relations. After all, we all have objective functions as varying institutions in the national landscape. And we want to ensure that everything that we do, every particular action, brings mutual benefit, particularly when it involves something to do with the government. So it is always important to ensure that one publicly supports, whether through a statement, whether through video, interviews, etc., when the government of the day does something that you appreciate or that you have called for. And I think thirdly, and this is the point that I wanted to make, is that as organized private sector and as business support organizations, there are certain intangible but very important roles for the organizations in the development of the society. And we have heard the adage that, stricter government, wiser population, but I think there is some degree of moral suasion that ought to be applied by chambers of commerce and the way that they drive economic growth forward through the institutions. And for those who are familiar with development, you'd know that a lot of focus in recent years has been placed on the role of institutions in growth and development. So it is extraordinarily important that one understands that non-coercive, but socially important type of role of the Chamber of Commerce, and to ensure that you bear some degree of responsibility, not just for, of course, firstly to the membership, because that is who you subscribe to you and you have a direct line of communication with them, but also to the wider private sector. The Chamber of Commerce in Guyana has managed its public image in a way that makes it seems as a credible interlocutor and as an organization that is truly representative of what businesses feel. That is not always without condemnation from certain groups or backlash from other groupings or people feeding into misperceptions or fueling misperceptions, but or misconceptions rather. But it's extraordinarily important that we understand the role of the organized private sector in driving growth. So I think I'll stop there. I know I'm limited by time. We can chat all day on this, but I just wanted to highlight that particular case because even though we are faced in Guyana with higher prices, I feel that this bit of advocacy has helped in some way. Naturally, of course, things have changed dramatically in the international scene from the time that this would have happened to now. And we need to be searching for more answers. But I think that this has helped in some way to cushion the effects, in the sense that even though you may not see complete price stability, or in some cases for consumers, what they would want to see price reductions, and I might investigate it and make it public, but I think that as a country, our inflation rate on average, particularly in the urban centers and for consumer items, is lower than the global average. I think our inflation last year was roughly about 5%, which when compared to the global average is just below. And so it has helped to mitigate. Naturally, of course, you have had other circumstances. So whilst it is a success in some regard, the work never ends, and it is something that we ought to continue to look at new and innovative ways of driving growth forward. So thank you all. My apologies if I was a bit long-winded, but I needed a bit of time to explain this. Thank you. Andrew, back over to you.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you very much for the very detailed presentation. And we understand that documents sometimes can be shared in certain circles. So we certainly appreciate those that you shared with us. We certainly also are cognizant of the necessity for collaborations, the necessity for the business sector to work with the government, and vice versa, most of all, because governments do not trade, but they're responsible for the environment in which businesses trade. And because of that, there is a necessary or a need for collaboration. And this can only redound if businesses and government collaborate, certainly with the benefit of all participants in mind. This can only redound profitably and beneficially to the entire country. Richard, you did not disappoint. Viv Richards normally makes a good innings, and yours was none below that par. Thank you very much again. At this time, we'll certainly seek to engage the audience. I know that there's some questions that came in. We'll seek to address them at this time. So, okay, there's some commendations, quite insightful. Richard was being thanked for sharing. That's from our very own Lizra. The commendations are coming in, Richard. Thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to also ask the audience for questions. I know that while the chat was on, I saw a question that came in. There was a follow-up question for, it said, to follow up on that question on technology implementation. Is there a strategic position within CARICHAM to persuade members to, at a minimum level with the use of technology? Given that a lot of issues we face in the Caribbean is because the companies we interface with do not employ the types of technology that would improve efficiency. So this is a question about the use of technology and our ability to interface with other, our company's ability to interface with other suppliers. I'm not sure who wants to take a stab at that. Eldris, would that be something that you want to take a stab at? So we have about 5 minutes to address these questions.
Can you repeat the question, please, Martin?
Okay, so it says to follow up on that question on technology implementation. is there a strategic position within CARICHAM to persuade members? I know this is directed to CARICHAM, but CARICHAM is a network of Caribbean chambers. So I'm asking one of the players here, one of the presenters, to persuade the members to be at a minimum level with the usage of technology, given that a lot of the issues we face in the Caribbean is because the companies we interface with do not employ or do not deploy the types of technology that would improve efficiency. Can you suggest something that perhaps CARICHAM should look at?
Certainly, digitization is the way forward, you know, and we need to make information more accessible to persons and make the ease of doing business. And I think definitely technology can help improve that. So giving people the ability to automate their systems and giving customers access or persons access to information, you know, at their convenience.
Okay, thank you very much. Now, audience must be chomping at the bit, and we've had some of the questions. Thank you so much for the input. We also have some polls that we would like to have addressed, and because we're running short on time, we started about 5 minutes after 10. It's now 11:35. So we are looking to close this session off now, and we would like to introduce our polls. And Cynthia, our coordinator, will be placing those polls for you. And Cynthia, could you take it away?
Yes, thank you very much, Martin, and thank you everyone for joining us today. We are really happy to have you with us, and we're happy that this session was very informative. And because we want to better our service, to make sure that you enjoy our service to you, I would say, I have 4 short questions for you that I will share. 2 that will be in the poll and 2 that I will put in the chat. So I will start the poll now, and in the meantime, I will put the 2 other questions in the chat so that you are able to follow the question. Thank you very much. I'm launching the poll now. So the first question is, what do you think of the regional growth series? So you have 3 options: not valuable, somewhat valuable, and very valuable. The second question is, how do you rate the speakers of this session? Very interesting, somewhat interesting, or not interesting? The 2 other questions we have, it's actually 3 other questions, sorry. The first one would like to know what other issues you would want to be addressed in our regional growth series. So I'm going to put a question in the chat. Feel free to answer there. The other question is, how can CARICHAM add real value to you? So I know that most of you are members of chambers. And if you are not yet, please join your local chambers, because they are part of a larger network that is able to provide more value to you. And the last question is, please share any other comments that you would like to share with CARICHAM. So. If you would like also to remain, I think, anonymous, I can also share with you my email address so that you maybe indicate your answers there. We have 3 minutes remaining for the poll. Just 2 minutes left, and then I'll let Martin close the session. So I see in the chat that some people have not seen the other questions. So 2 questions are in the poll and the 3 other questions are in the chat. So I can put them back so that you share again your feedback. Thank you very much, all of you who participated to the poll. Feel free to still share your feedback in the chat or send me an email. I put my email in the chat as well. At this time, I would just like to invite Martin for the vote of thanks. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Cynthia. Okay, so colleagues, audience, today we attempted to look at the issues surrounding the global supply chain. We wanted to consider the mitigating effects on the crisis, and we had 3 presenters for you. I'd like first of all to thank Brian, our chairman, and his team for helping to facilitate this timely discussion. And we are pressed on all sides. The issues are coming at us daily. So it's incumbent on the chamber to consider these things, to have discussions, and to come up with plausible solutions. To Brian for his remarks, his welcoming remarks, and his leadership for this term in CARICHAM, we say thank you very much. And Brian, we are with you, we're supporting what you're doing, and thank you for the opportunities. I wish to thank Andrew, our former Executive Director for the St. Kitts Nevis Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and our current advisor and the former lead for the trade facilitation for this working group, which I know chair. Thank you so much, Andrew, for the information and the presentation that you shared. To Eldris, Pierre-Mauricette, who is the island manager of tropical shipping, certainly you've shared a lot of the technical and also industry-specific information with respect to shipping. And there's been a lot of requests, there have been a lot of requests for us to share the presentation with the audience, and I'm sure that had no small bit to contribute to the requests. Thank you very much. And Andrew and Richard, the Georgetown Chamber of Commerce certainly, as Richard said, took a frontal approach to addressing the supply chain crisis. And it didn't start simply with the issues that we're now confronted with, but their response started since there was a blockage in the Suez Canal. And that is a sort of forward thinking and the sort of leadership that we look for, and we certainly appreciate. Richard was, his organization was able to take the discussions to the government and had buy-in when the government made the proposal. Now, I mean, if they come out, if the government says, you know, they take benefit for it, we don't mind. We know that the business sector will be the ultimate, well, not just the business sector, but the society as a whole, the country will be the ultimate beneficiaries. And we certainly thank Richard for the information that was shared and the approach that is certainly something that we all can use. So thank you very much, Richard, for your presentation. So Cynthia, for coordinating these events. Sometimes the person behind the scenes doesn't get the thanks that they need to. We certainly want to acknowledge her. And also the Dominica Association of Industry and Commerce, the DIC, for facilitating their this presentation, this growth series through their portals. So thank you very much all to CARICHAM, to our colleagues, to the audience. Hopefully we will see you all back on our next series, our CARICHAM Regional Growth Series. It's been a pleasure serving you for this particular event, and we wish you very well, happy and successful trading. May God bless you. Thank you.